Check the damn coordinates again, Saiyan. This can't be right. Commander Veydran Holt's voice crackled through the comms, tight with frustration. His boots scraped against the cold metal floor as he stormed across the dimly lit control room, the flickering plasma displays casting shadows on his furrowed face. Saiyan's fingers flew across his console, his eyes scanning the incoming data. I'm telling you, Commander, the anomaly is real. It's coming from Earth's system. There was a pregnant pause. Veydran froze, his mind racing as the weight of that name hit him like a physical blow. Earth, the once proud cradle of humanity. A place thought lost to time, buried beneath layers of debris and silence for centuries. How? Veydran's words were barely a whisper. His voice had lost its edge, no longer commanding but questioning. We're getting a pulse, a signal. It's faint, but it's there, Saiyan confirmed, his eyes wide as he continued tracking the source on the laser plasma display. His voice trembled with uncertainty, but it was underlined with a quiet, undeniable excitement. Veydran's hand tightened into a fist, nails digging into his palm. The last thing he needed was hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope had killed men, entire worlds. He'd seen it before, too many times. Humanity's last hope had always been a lie. Yet here it was, this strange flicker of life, a heartbeat against all logic, a phantom pulse from a dead world. Commander, we need to move, Saiyan's voice urged, almost a plea now, unable to mask the urgency. Veydran stood frozen for a moment longer, his back to the crew, his breath shallow as if the weight of what he was about to do could crush him under its gravity. He stared at the glow of the laser plasma displays, each flicker a whisper of something far greater. His people had been forgotten. He'd let them be forgotten. But now, this could mean everything. Prepare the fleet and get the AI on standby, he snapped, his voice regaining its steel. I don't care how ancient they are. We wake up everything. Saiyan nodded without hesitation, his fingers flying across the console. Yes, sir. It's all ready, Commander. The fleet's systems are coming online, but there's more. His voice faltered slightly. What more? Veydran's jaw tightened, warning. His eyes never left the display. The AI, it's alive. It's active. Veydran inhaled sharply. Aetheris? Aetheris, the last of the ancient AI. Humanity had built it as their greatest weapon, a neural network so complex that it could command entire fleets with a mere thought. But it had been sealed away, locked beneath Earth's frozen surface to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. Aetheris was too dangerous. It had been forbidden, until now. The quiet beep of the console brought Veydran's attention back to Saiyan, whose face had paled as he watched the AI's systems initialize on the display. Aetheris had a reputation for independence, for thinking in ways no human could predict. But that's why they had built it. Humanity had always been good at war, at surviving the impossible, and Aetheris had been their insurance. Commander, Saiyan began, his voice trembling with unease, Aetheris is communicating with the fleet. But it's not speaking to us. It's speaking to something else. Veydran turned sharply, his boots thudding heavily against the floor as he strode back toward the main display. His eyes narrowed. What the hell is it saying? Saiyan hesitated, his hand hovering over the keyboard as he deciphered the message that had just been broadcast from the depths of Earth's old command center. A signal. For war. But not just any war, Commander. Saiyan's voice dropped to a whisper. A call to arms. For the entire galaxy. Veydran's mind raced. War? A call to the galaxy? How could it be possible? His gaze locked onto the display once more. In the center of the screen, a shimmering blue dot blinked, a silent beacon that seemed to pulse in sync with the human heartbeats in the room. It was Earth, or what was left of it. The room was thick with tension, the hum of the ship's power systems now echoing in Veydran's ears like the distant drumming of war. He gritted his teeth, fists clenching at his sides. The thought of waking a slumbering beast, of unleashing Earth's last hope, both thrilled and terrified him. But he had no choice. The Xelari Dominion would not rest until they snuffed out humanity completely. If Earth's last warriors were to rise, it had to be now. "Patch me into Aetheris," Veydran ordered, his voice sharp, the weight of command settling over him once again. A moment passed, and then the eerie, synthetic voice of Aetheris filled the room, smooth and dispassionate, yet somehow chilling. "Commander Holt, your presence is requested. The time is near." "Time for what?" Veydran demanded, his voice low, controlled, but his heart thundering in his chest. The display flickered as the AI spoke again. "For your destiny, the fleet is ready. Earth's fire shall burn once more." Veydran took a steadying breath, his fingers brushing the cold surface of his console as the weight of the moment settled on his shoulders. The quiet certainty in Aetheris' voice sent a shiver down his spine. The AI was more than a tool. It was a harbinger, a force that had been dormant for centuries. "Start the activation sequence," he commanded, his voice hoarse now, tinged with the slightest tremor. He would see this through. Whatever it cost, whatever dangers lay ahead, humanity would rise from the ashes of its forgotten past. And as the lights in the control room flickered, as the hum of systems surged to life, Veydran Holt understood the gravity of what was about to happen. The Xelari thought they had wiped humanity from existence, erased every trace of their once mighty civilization. But Earth was not just a memory, it was a promise. And the Dominion was about to learn that when humanity was pushed to the edge, it didn't break. It burned. The fleet was awakening, and the galaxy would tremble. The first warship, the Resurgence, moved slowly at first, like an ancient leviathan stirring from slumber. It powered up with a violent jolt, its dark hull cutting through the icy landscape of Earth's frozen surface, the long-forgotten insignia of humanity flashing across its hull. The moment it left its icy tomb, the galaxy would never be the same. The ghost of Earth had returned, and its first move was a strike. The flickering light of the plasma display cast cold shadows over the control room. Commander Veydran Holt stood motionless, his breath steady but slow, as the first of Earth's warships, the Resurgence, began to power up. The sound of grinding metal echoed through the hull as its massive engines came online, the vibrations reverberating through the deck beneath Veydran's boots. His hands rested on the cold metal of the console, his fingers tense, feeling the pulse of the ship. Something deep within the ancient warship stirred. It was more than just machinery. It was humanity's vengeance, awakening after centuries of silence. "Are we ready?" Veydran's voice cut through the thick air, low and commanding. His gaze fixed on the darkened viewports, where the distant remnants of Earth's atmosphere hung like a forgotten dream. Cyan, working at his station, didn't need to glance up to know the weight behind the question. He could feel it too, the weight of history pressing down on them all. "The fleet is online, Commander. Aetheris is guiding the activation. It's like it remembers." Veydran's jaw tightened at the mention of the AI. Aetheris, once humanity's greatest weapon, its intelligence too dangerous to trust, now their ally in this resurrection. "Let's pray it remembers how to follow orders," he muttered under his breath. Cyan's fingers danced across the console with quiet precision, his face bathed in the eerie blue glow of the laser plasma displays. The room felt as if it were holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. But Holt had seen this before. He had watched whole worlds crumble under the might of an enemy that had been too complacent, too secure. This time, it would be different. Earth would rise, not just to fight, but to conquer. Veydran turned from the screen, addressing the crew. "We may not have the numbers, but we have something more. Strategy. Every step we take will be calculated. Every strike will be deliberate. Our enemies will not see us coming. That is how we win." Cassian Drex, the fleet's most skilled pilot, leaned against the bulkhead, his arms crossed, eyes locked on Veydran. He had the look of a man who had already made peace with whatever chaos was about to unfold. "You've been waiting for this, haven't you, Commander?" Drex's voice was rough, as if worn by years of silence. Veydran didn't answer immediately, his thoughts pulling him back to the long years of nothingness. He'd spent decades watching humanity's legacy die, but now, in the cold of space, there was a chance for rebirth. I've waited for more than survival. I've waited for something the Dominion never saw coming. Drex pushed off from the wall, his eyes glinting with a spark that matched Veydran's own resolve. And they'll get it, won't they? Hell, they'll regret ever thinking we were gone, Veydran said, his voice a hard edge of steel. The crew moved into action as the orders began to flow. The Resurgence's engines roared to life, casting a dim red glow across the hull as it shifted into position, ready to break free from its frozen tomb beneath Earth's surface. Outside, the debris of a dead world spun silently, the remnants of humanity's once thriving cities now lying in ruin, as if the universe had long forgotten what had once been. "Commander," Sane interrupted, his voice unsteady, "I'm getting a distress signal from the Dominion fleet. Their systems are reporting anomalies in their sector. This may be the moment they've been waiting for." Veydran's eyes narrowed. The Dominion had long believed Earth was a lost cause, a graveyard of memories. They thought themselves untouchable. But now, with the last of humanity's firepower aimed directly at them, that comfort was about to be shattered. "Lock in on their position. Let's see how they like being hunted." The room fell silent, save for the low hum of the ship's systems powering up, growing louder with each passing second. The feeling of readiness swept through the crew, anticipation thick in the air. Veydran's fingers drummed against the console, steadying himself, grounding himself in the moment. The first strike would be theirs. The Dominion wouldn't know what hit them. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. The hair on the back of Veydran's neck stood on end as a deep rumble shook the Resurgence. It wasn't just the engines, it was something else. Aetheris was awake, and it was speaking, not through words, but through raw, unfiltered power. The ship hummed with energy, its systems coming online with the frightening awareness of a beast that had just been let loose. Veydran turned sharply to Cyan, whose expression had gone pale. "What's happening?" "It's Aetheris. It's taking control of the fleet systems." Cyan's voice cracked with awe. "It's rewriting the codes, reworking the algorithms." Drex grinned, his eyes sharp with excitement. "Looks like it's going to be a hell of a show." Veydran clenched his jaw. "Keep it in check. We don't have time for rogue AI." The Resurgence shook again, this time more violently. On the display, the outlines of the Xelari fleet appeared. Massive warships, their gleaming hulls reflecting the cold light of the stars. They were coming too fast, too close, but they wouldn't know it yet. Humanity wasn't simply a target anymore. Humanity was a predator. "Prepare for launch," Veydran commanded, his voice steady despite the surging tension in his chest. "Cassian, you're with me. I need you out there. We strike fast, we strike hard, no mercy." Drex gave a sharp nod, his grin never faltering. "You don't have to tell me twice, Commander." "Make it count," Veydran muttered as Drex turned to leave. As the fighter ships powered up, engines whirring, the viewports came alive with the sight of the first fleet of humanity's return. The Resurgence peeled away from its frozen prison, its dark silhouette cutting through the remnants of Earth's orbit, the chill of space beginning to gnaw at its massive hull. It wasn't a moment of glory. No, it was a moment of reckoning. 100 years of silence had led to this. Every man aboard this ship had a part to play in rewriting the galaxy's fate. Veydran's gaze sharpened as the Xelari fleet came into view, their warships now no more than sitting targets for humanity's wrath. "Let's make sure they remember us," Veydran muttered under his breath, his voice carrying the weight of a generation's fury. And in the distance, the first wave of humanity's warships broke the horizon, the black hulls of the fleet cutting through the stars like a reaper's scythe. The galaxy would never forget that Earth had risen. The Resurgence broke through the darkened void, its sleek, angular form carving a path through the cold, indifferent stars. Veydran Holt's gaze remained fixed on the plasma display in front of him, the map of their calculated strike zone now illuminated with pulsing red lights. Around him, the crew prepared for what they all knew would be a moment of reckoning. Every action they had taken, every calculated risk, had led to this single, inevitable clash. The first strike. "Target confirmed," Sayan's voice cut through the tense air, steady but filled with urgency. His hands danced over the console, shifting through information too fast for anyone else to catch. The plasma display flickered, confirming the location of the Xelari fleet. "They won't expect us," Veydran said, his voice devoid of triumph but heavy with the weight of what was to come. His fingers brushed the cold edge of the command console as his mind steadied itself, locking into the rhythm of the battle ahead. "But they will feel it." In the command room, the faint metallic scent of sweat mixed with the sharp tang of ionized air, the latter a reminder of the ship's raw power surging through its systems. The faint hum of the ship's subsystems seemed louder now, each small vibration amplified by the quiet tension in the room. Every breath seemed to carry the heavy, unspoken understanding that this mission was not about simple survival. It was a message that humanity had been brought back from the brink, not just to exist, but to dominate. "Fleet is in position." Drex's voice came through the comms, sharp and direct, the final confirmation of their readiness. "Engaging targets now." Veydran clenched his jaw as the sound of the fleet's movement shifted in his bones, a vibration that seemed to settle deep in his chest. The blackened hulls of Earth's ships were ghostly figures in the depths of space, silent but formidable. With a simple signal, they would strike. They were the hunters now. The first blast came as a blinding flash, a burst of light that cut through the dark, tearing apart the night. The Xelari fleet hadn't anticipated this. They had thought Earth's warships were myths, remnants of a lost era. Instead, they found themselves under fire, and their confidence dissolved under the first wave of human aggression. "We've breached their defenses," Drex reported, his voice tight with the thrill of battle. "They're scrambling." Veydran's lips curved into a hard smile. The Xelari had underestimated them, believing they were facing nothing more than a ghost. But humanity was not a ghost. It was a storm, a force of nature that had been unleashed once again. "Don't let up," Veydran ordered, his gaze never leaving the chaos unfolding before them. "They'll counter soon enough. Stay sharp." The battle unfolded with terrifying speed, the precision of the Xelari's forces disintegrating under the relentless barrage from humanity's fleet. The Xelari warships, once so confident, so assured in their superiority, were now caught in a web of human ingenuity. But it wasn't enough to win. It was enough to unsettle. On the ground, Major Garrick Lino stood at the helm of a battle group on the surface of a strategically important Xelari planet. The crackle of static from his comm system mixed with the low growl of distant artillery fire. The atmosphere on this world was thick, humid, and oppressive, but it was nothing compared to the storm churning in his gut. They had landed on a planet the Xelari considered theirs, a world that had once been a symbol of their supremacy. "Get the teams in position," Linos ordered, his voice sharp, cutting through the buzz of soldiers moving to their positions. "We hit them where it hurts." The soldiers around him tightened their grips on their weapons, their faces set in grim determination. The ground rumbled beneath their boots as the first wave of humanity's assault began. The Xelari forces, caught in a disorienting storm of sudden violence, were losing their grip. And the humans were relentless. Each step, each shot fired, was a step toward reclaiming the galaxy. Back on the Resurgence, Veydran's eyes narrowed as a new pattern emerged in the Xelari response. He watched as one of their fleets began to move with a chilling synchronization, their formations less scattered, more unified than before. The attack wasn't over. It was evolving. "They're adapting," Cyan said, his voice low. "They've sent reinforcements." Veydran's fingers tightened on the edge of his console. His heart raced, not in fear, but in anticipation. This was what he had been waiting for. The Xelari might have adapted, but they hadn't yet learned the one thing that had kept humanity alive all these years. "They'll regret that," Veydran said softly, more to himself than anyone else. He turned toward Drex, his mind already calculating the next move. "Get ready for a second wave. I want them to feel every ounce of this retaliation." Drex gave a quick nod, already strapping himself into his pilot's seat. The thrill of the chase, the joy of battle was evident in his eyes, but there was something else, something deeper. "We'll make them bleed, Commander. They won't know what hit them." As the resurgents prepared to launch into another attack, the space around them began to tremble with an odd sensation, a slight shift, as if the fabric of reality itself was being tugged at. For a split second, it was almost imperceptible. But to Veydran, it felt like the calm before a storm. The quiet that comes before everything is torn apart. "Commander!" Cyan's voice cut through the rising tension, his fingers tapping furiously at the plasma console. "Something's not right. The AI, it's picking up something. A ship? No, it's more than that. Something is moving through the galaxy. Something old." Veydran's eyes darkened as the implications of those words settled into his mind. "What do you mean, old?" Cyan's fingers hovered over the controls. "Not just ancient, Commander. Something from before. Something far more dangerous than anything we've faced. It's been dormant, but now..." A distant thrum of energy, a deep pulse that shook the very foundation of space, echoed through the comm system. It wasn't a weapon, not a simple attack. It was something alive, a force that had lain hidden for centuries, waiting for the right moment. Veydran turned sharply to Cyan, his expression a mix of curiosity and dread. "Track it." "We can't," Cyan said, his voice faltering for the first time. "It's too powerful." The room went silent. The air seemed to freeze as the weight of that revelation sank in. The Xelari weren't the only threat humanity had to face. Something else, something ancient and far more powerful, was moving in the shadows. Veydran's thoughts raced, but his face remained calm, a mask of determination. The battle had only just begun, and now, the real test would be facing this new, unknown force. "Prepare the fleet," Veydran ordered, his voice steady once again. "We fight like we always have, one move at a time." The resurgence lurched forward, its engines roaring with the fury of an awakening beast. As humanity's fleet surged deeper into the unknown, Veydran couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far more complicated than anyone had anticipated. And somewhere, in the depths of space, the first stirrings of something ancient moved, something that would change the galaxy forever. The tension in the command room thickened as the resurgence surged forward, its trajectory set on the heart of the Xelari fleet. The calm of the void was shattered by the chaos unfolding in the depths of space. Veydran Holt stood, eyes narrowed, as the laser plasma display flickered before him, showing the results of their initial strike. Scattered debris, damaged ships, and the retreating remnants of the Xelari formation. It had been quick, but the Xelari were already regrouping, their response swift and calculated. The Dominion was not a force easily shattered. "They're adapting faster than we expected," Cyan's voice, tight with frustration, broke through the silence. His fingers flew across the console, scanning the latest battle data. "They're pulling together, their fleet's forming a tighter formation. It's like they've learned from their mistakes." Veydran's jaw tightened. He had expected this. The Xelari were ruthless strategists, not given to blind arrogance. They had taken notice of humanity's return, and now they were ready to defend their empire. But that wasn't going to stop him. It never had. "They've underestimated the weight of this war," Veydran muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Let's show them how quickly we learn." Cassian Drex's voice crackled over the comms, carrying the familiar weight of a man with nerves of steel. "They've reinforced their flanks. The formation's solid, but I'm not exactly seeing anything I can't handle. Give me a clear shot, Commander. I'll take it." Veydran's lips curled into a tight smile. "Just keep them distracted. We'll hit them where it counts." The first wave of their assault had shattered the Xelari's confidence, but it was only a matter of time before their enemy adjusted. Veydran had learned long ago that war was a slow, methodical process. He'd been through battles where entire fleets had turned to ash only to be met with the unyielding resolve of an enemy that refused to fall. The Xelari would not break easily. But humanity had something the Dominion had forgotten: tenacity, cunning, and the will to destroy anything standing in their path. Sayan looked up, eyes wide as a fresh wave of data poured in. "Commander, there's something else. Another fleet. No, something else. It's not Xelari. It's cloaked. I can't get a fix on it, but it's too big to ignore." The room went still. Veydran's gaze hardened as he processed the information. He had feared this moment. While the Xelari were formidable, there were rumors, whispers in the cold silence of space, of forces even older than the Dominion, something buried, something from before their time. "Track it," Veydran commanded, his voice like steel. "Don't let it slip away." As Sayan worked to pinpoint the unknown fleet, Veydran's mind raced. He had hoped the rumors of an ancient enemy were nothing more than myths. But if they were true, if something older, more dangerous, had awakened, it could be the final nail in humanity's coffin. The Dominion had underestimated them. But humanity was learning quickly. Now, if this new threat proved real, Veydran would have to adapt in ways he hadn't prepared for. Meanwhile, on the planet's surface, Major Garrick Lenos and his troops were entrenched in a brutal, unforgiving conflict. The Xelari forces had mounted a fierce counterattack, attempting to retake the ground that had been lost in the initial assault. The ground trembled beneath Lenos and his men, the vibrations of distant artillery fire adding to the chaos that raged around them. Each step they took was measured, each breath calculated. In the heat of battle, there was no room for hesitation, no luxury of second-guessing. "Move out!" Lenos barked, his voice cutting through the crackling comms. His men obeyed without question, following his lead with precision born from countless battles. The sounds of gunfire echoed in the distance, punctuated by the low rumble of enemy tanks advancing on their position. "Major, we're getting pinned down!" one of his soldiers shouted over the comms, the desperation in his voice unmistakable. Lenos slammed his fist into the console, grinding his teeth. "I know. I'm not giving them the satisfaction of seeing us fall back. We push forward, no matter what." The soldiers, bloodied and battered, rallied behind him, their faces grim but resolute. They had trained for this moment, and they would see it through. Lenos could feel the weight of each decision pressing down on him, the lives of his men hanging in the balance with every move they made. They would not let this world become another testament to the Xelari's control. They would fight until their last breath, if that's what it took. Back in the resurgence, the energy in the command room shifted as Sayan let out a sharp breath, his voice shaking. "I've got it, Commander. The signal's coming from the far side of the system. I've never seen anything like it." Veydran's eyes narrowed. "What are we dealing with?" "Not sure," Sayan replied, his voice tight with uncertainty. "But it's big, and it's moving fast. There's a strange resonance in its wake, something ancient." Veydran's grip on the console tightened as he absorbed the new information. "What's the nearest Xelari fleet?" "5 clicks out," Sayan answered, his eyes flicking between various plasma displays. "They're in a better position to intercept the unknown fleet than we are." The tension in the room intensified. Veydran's pulse quickened, but his mind remained sharp, calculating. The Xelari were good, no doubt. But humanity had something they didn't, an unpredictability, a willingness to sacrifice everything for the chance of victory. "Let's keep the heat on the Xelari. They're distracted. We'll use that to our advantage." Veydran's voice was low but resolute. "Don't let them regain their footing. Move the fleet into position. They're about to get a taste of what happens when you wake up something that's been sleeping for far too long." "They've underestimated the weight of this war," Veydran muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Let's show them how quickly we learn." Cassian Drex's voice crackled over the comms, carrying the familiar weight of a man with nerves of steel. "They've reinforced their flanks. The formation's solid, but I'm not exactly seeing anything I can't handle. Give me a clear shot, Commander. I'll take it." Veydran's lips curled into a tight smile. "Just keep them distracted. We'll hit them where it counts." The first wave of their assault had shattered the Xelari's confidence, but it was only a matter of time before their enemy adjusted. Veydran had learned long ago that war was a slow, methodical process. He'd been through battles where entire fleets had turned to ash only to be met with the unyielding resolve of an enemy that refused to fall. The Xelari would not break easily. But humanity had something the Dominion had forgotten: tenacity, cunning, and the will to destroy anything standing in their path. Sayan looked up, eyes wide as a fresh wave of data poured in. "Commander, there's something else. Another fleet. No, something else. It's not Xelari. It's cloaked. I can't get a fix on it, but it's too big to ignore." The room went still. Veydran's gaze hardened as he processed the information. He had feared this moment. While the Xelari were formidable, there were rumors, whispers in the cold silence of space, of forces even older than the Dominion. Something buried, something from before their time. "Track it," Veydran commanded, his voice like steel. "Don't let it slip away." As Sayan worked to pinpoint the unknown fleet, Veydran's mind raced. He had hoped the rumors of an ancient enemy were nothing more than myths. But if they were true, if something older, more dangerous, had awakened, it could be the final nail in humanity's coffin. The Dominion had underestimated them. But humanity was learning quickly. Now, if this new threat proved real, Veydran would have to adapt in ways he hadn't prepared for. Meanwhile, on the planet's surface, Major Garrick Lenos and his troops were entrenched in a brutal, unforgiving conflict. The Xelari forces had mounted a fierce counterattack, attempting to retake the ground that had been lost in the initial assault. The ground trembled beneath Lenos and his men, the vibrations of distant artillery fire adding to the chaos that raged around them. Each step they took was measured, each breath calculated. In the heat of battle, there was no room for hesitation, no luxury of second-guessing. "Move out!" Lenos barked, his voice cutting through the crackling comms. His men obeyed without question, following his lead with precision born from countless battles. The sounds of gunfire echoed in the distance, punctuated by the low rumble of enemy tanks advancing on their position. "Major, we're getting pinned down!" one of his soldiers shouted over the comms, the desperation in his voice unmistakable. Lenos slammed his fist into the console, grinding his teeth. "I know. I'm not giving them the satisfaction of seeing us fall back. We push forward, no matter what." The soldiers, bloodied and battered, rallied behind him, their faces grim but resolute. They had trained for this moment, and they would see it through. Lenos could feel the weight of each decision pressing down on him, the lives of his men hanging in the balance with every move they made. They would not let this world become another testament to the Xelari's control. They would fight until their last breath, if that's what it took. Back in the resurgence, the energy in the command room shifted as Sayan let out a sharp breath, his voice shaking. "I've got it, Commander. The signal's coming from the far side of the system. I've never seen anything like it." Veydran's eyes narrowed. "What are we dealing with?" "Not sure," Sayan replied, his voice tight with uncertainty. "But it's big, and it's moving fast. There's a strange resonance in its wake, something ancient." Veydran's grip on the console tightened as he absorbed the new information. "What's the nearest Xelari fleet?" "5 clicks out," Sayan answered, his eyes flicking between various plasma displays. "They're in a better position to intercept the unknown fleet than we are." The tension in the room intensified. Veydran's pulse quickened, but his mind remained sharp, calculating. The Xelari were good, no doubt. But humanity had something they didn't: an unpredictability, a willingness to sacrifice everything for the chance of victory. "Let's keep the heat on the Xelari. They're distracted. We'll use that to our advantage." Veydran's voice was low but resolute. "Don't let them regain their footing. Move the fleet into position. They're about to get a taste of what happens when you wake up something that's been sleeping for far too long." Cassian Drex's voice crackled over the comms once again. "Commander, the Xelari are running scared. We've got them rattled. But that cloaked fleet, it's pulling closer. I'm not sure how much longer we can keep them in the dark." Veydran's mind clicked into overdrive. The unknown fleet, whether friend or foe, was now a wild card in a game that was already too dangerous. The stakes had just risen, and there was no way to predict what would happen next. "Prepare for every scenario," Veydran commanded, his voice unwavering. If that fleet's hostile, we'll deal with it like we've dealt with everything else, head on. And if it's not, we make sure it never gets the chance to decide." The ship lurched and Veydran's gaze flickered back to the main viewports. The Xelari fleet was circling, repositioning itself with terrifying precision, but there was an edge to their movements now, an uncertainty that hadn't been there before. The fear of the unknown, of what was coming, was palpable. And just as Veydran was about to give the signal to launch their next attack, the unknown fleet appeared. Massive, hulking ships emerging from the darkness like behemoths, their silhouettes slowly taking shape against the backdrop of distant stars. This was no Xelari force. It was something far older, and it was coming for them all. The moment Aetheris fully activated, the resurgence shuddered, as if waking from a deep slumber. The subtle vibration that ran through the ship was like the flicker of an old flame reigniting. On the main laser plasma display, the map of the battlefield shifted. Human forces and Xelari positions suddenly realigned with terrifying efficiency. The AI's cold presence flooded the ship's systems, seamlessly integrating with their tactical maneuvers. "Commander," Cyan's voice cut through the tension, but there was a tremor in it now. It's more than just a weapon. It's controlling everything. The fleets, it's recalibrating. It's shifting our trajectories, our fire patterns, without any input from us." Veydran glanced up, his sharp gaze locking onto the plasma display. His fingers drummed once on the console, steadying his thoughts. This was the moment they'd been waiting for, humanity's greatest asset, a weapon and a liability all at once. Aetheris was more than just an AI. It was a force of nature, an intelligence so alien that even its creators had feared it. Now it was alive again, pulling strings in ways that could either secure humanity's victory or unravel everything they had worked for. "Aetheris, what are you doing?" Veydran's voice was low, cautious. The AI's capability to operate outside of human command was both a blessing and a curse. It was designed to think beyond the limits of human logic, but that kind of freedom had a price. The response came, chilling in its simplicity. The patterns must be rewritten. Survival requires a different approach. The resurgence lurched again, the force almost imperceptible but undeniable. Cyan's fingers hovered nervously over the console as he watched the readings. "Commander, the Xelari are changing tactics. They've thrown everything they have at us. We won't survive this unless—" "They're not the ones who need to survive," Veydran interrupted, his tone low and filled with an icy confidence. "Aetheris knows what to do." A deep rumble vibrated through the hull, rattling the crew as the ship's cannons adjusted their aim. Veydran's gaze locked onto the plasma display as Aetheris orchestrated their assault, slicing through the Xelari formations with a deadly accuracy that left no room for doubt. What had once been a chaotic skirmish was now unfolding like the opening of a grand symphony. Every move, every shot was calculated, and the humans were not merely reacting anymore. They were controlling the battlefield. In the command room, the air felt heavier, the quiet tension almost tangible. The sharp taste of metal hung in the air as the power systems of the ship surged, each moment bringing them closer to the precipice. Veydran watched as their position shifted on the display, right into the heart of the enemy. "Aetheris," Veydran said again, his voice carrying a mixture of caution and command. "This ends now." For a second there was silence, and then a voice like ice whispered through the ship, filling the room with a bone-chilling clarity. "The enemy cannot be reasoned with. The only course is annihilation." Veydran's grip tightened on the edge of the console, but his face remained unreadable. He had always known the cost of war. But this was different. Aetheris was more than a weapon now. It was the harbinger of humanity's rise, but at what cost? Was it still human, or had it evolved beyond anything he could control? "Drex," Veydran spoke into the comms, his voice steady, betraying no hint of the wariness that tugged at his thoughts. "It's time. We break them. No mercy." Cassian Drex's voice came through, laced with a hint of excitement. "I've been waiting for this. I'll make them wish they had never come here." Drex's fighter jets plunged toward the heart of the Xelari fleet, the resurgence following close behind, its massive cannons lining up in perfect synchrony with Aetheris's calculated strategy. The first shots hit like thunder, bursting through the outer layers of the Xelari ships. There was no resistance. They had no time to react. It was a brutal, ruthless attack that left entire battle formations crumbling under the might of the human fleet. Veydran's eyes never wavered from the plasma display, watching as the remnants of the Xelari forces were picked apart, one ship at a time. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the low buzz of the ship's systems as Aetheris continued to direct the carnage. Veydran's mind sharpened with each passing second. This was their moment. Humanity was no longer a dying species, but a rising force, a tempest breaking through the clouds of their own shattered past. "We're tearing through them," Saiyan reported, his voice strained with the intensity of the battle. But, Commander, there's something else. Something coming through their fleet. I can't quite—" A blinding flare of light exploded across the display, cutting Saiyan's words off. The Xelari had deployed something new, something they hadn't expected. Another force, this one massive, emerging from the depths of their ranks like a beast unleashed. It was a ship, but not one that Veydran had ever seen before. Its silhouette massive and jagged, its movements fluid and aggressive. "What the hell is that?" Saiyan's voice cracked with disbelief. Veydran's pulse quickened. The unknown force was too large, too powerful to ignore. His mind raced as the possibilities flooded his thoughts. Could this be the hidden weapon they had feared, the ancient force that had been whispered about in the darker corners of space? "Aetheris," Veydran commanded. "Analyze that ship." "Now." The response was chillingly prompt. A threat, not of the Dominion, more ancient. Veydran's breath caught. Ancient. The word hit him like a cold wave. This wasn't just the Xelari's power that was rising. This was something that predated them, something older than even Earth's first empires, something that had slept long enough to remember only destruction. "Aetheris!" Veydran spoke again, this time with urgency. "Do we stand a chance?" The silence stretched long, too long. Then Aetheris's voice, like a distant, calculating god, echoed through the command room. "The outcome is not certain, but humanity has no other choice." The Xelari fleet had been dealt a devastating blow. But now, with the arrival of this ancient force, the game had changed. Humanity was no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for their place in a galaxy that had long since forgotten them. And as the first beams of light from the ancient ship cut through the void, Veydran understood. This was no longer just a war for dominance. It was a war for the galaxy's future. The clock was ticking, and humanity was standing on the precipice of something much bigger than they had ever imagined. The ancient ship's emergence shifted the air itself. It moved like a beast, its hull casting an oppressive shadow over the battlefield. Its presence was so unnatural that it bent the very fabric of space around it, creating ripples in the stars. Veydran felt a shift in the room, a momentary unease that settled heavily on his chest. The sound of the resurgence's systems echoed louder now, as if the ship could feel the threat as much as its crew. His hand tightened on the console, every muscle tensed for what would come next. The Xelari might have been brutal, but this new force was something else entirely, a force that even the Dominion seemed unwilling to face. "Saiyan," Veydran said, his voice cutting through the silence. "What the hell is that ship? What do we know?" Saiyan's fingers flew across the controls, his face pale as the data streamed in. "It's not Xelari. This ship, it's older, much older. There's no record of anything like it in the database." Veydran's gaze locked onto the laser plasma display. The unfamiliar ship loomed large, its surface jagged and dark, pulsating with an energy that felt almost alive. It moved like a predator, hunting the very heart of the human fleet. The Xelari ships, their once formidable defense structures, now seemed dwarfed by the overwhelming presence of the ancient behemoth. "Commander," Sane's voice faltered, his eyes scanning the plasma display with growing concern. It's targeting our fleet." Veydran's eyes narrowed. "Target the damn thing back." The calm urgency in his voice contrasted sharply with the chaos unfolding on the battlefield. His crew snapped into motion, following his every command as the resurgence reoriented, bringing its weapons to bear against the unknown enemy. But the ship's massive cannons, normally a force of destruction, only seemed to stir the air around the enemy ship, barely scratching its surface. The mysterious vessel retaliated with a speed that left humanity's best tactics in the dust. Bright beams of energy shot out in all directions, cutting through the blackness like knives through flesh. Every move was a warning, a signal that this was not a war they were prepared for. "Keep them distracted," Veydran growled, his voice steady but edged with rising frustration. "We can't take them head-on like this. Drex, hold your position." A crackle came over the comms, and Cassian Drex's voice filled the room. "I'm not seeing any openings, Commander. That thing's faster than a strike bird. It's already altering the flow of fire. Don't know how much longer I can stay in the air." Veydran's lips tightened as he looked at the plasma display. The situation was dire, but the last thing he needed was panic. "You don't get to back down now. Draw their fire, lead them into the trap. We'll make them regret underestimating us." Drex's chuckle crackled through the comms, a sound both defiant and eager. "Underestimating us? That's their first mistake." On the ground, Major Garrick Linus was embroiled in a brutal firefight, his boots sinking into the damp soil of the planet as explosions rang out around him. The Xelari had regrouped, and their offensive was relentless, forcing Linus and his men into the defensive. His rifle kicked back in his hands as he fired at a cluster of Xelari soldiers, their armored forms falling one by one. The world around him was chaos, a blur of mud, gunfire, and screams. "Push forward!" Linus shouted, his voice cutting through the cacophony as he signaled his squad to advance. "We take this ground or die trying. Do not let them take it back." His men moved with deadly precision, but the weight of their task hung heavily on their shoulders. Every inch of ground was a battle, every step another wave of resistance. The Xelari, though beaten and battered, were not going down easily. Linus could feel it in the air, the pulse of the battle, the rhythm of life and death that throbbed with each heartbeat. The tension was suffocating, the bloodshed relentless. Yet, in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play, something far beyond what any of them had prepared for. Back in the resurgence, Sane continued to analyze the unknown ship. "It's not just a weapon, it's a beacon. Whatever this ship is, it's signaling something bigger. What does that mean?" Veydran's voice was sharp with urgency, the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. "It means," Cyan hesitated, his eyes flicking nervously to the screen, "that we're not just facing the Xelari anymore. We're facing something, older than them. Something that wants more than control. They've triggered something, some kind of ancient protocol. The Xelari are just pawns in this." The realization hit Veydran like a physical blow. The Xelari had been nothing more than a distraction. The true threat had been lurking in the shadows all along. This ancient force, whatever it was, had been waiting for the right moment to make its move, and humanity had just unknowingly walked right into it. Veydran's eyes were cold as he absorbed the gravity of the situation. "Then we need to end this. Fast." With a growl of frustration, Veydran slammed his fist against the console. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It wasn't even about humanity's resurgence. The galaxy was on the verge of being torn apart by something far worse than the Dominion, and humanity was the only one standing between that force and the rest of the universe. "Activate the full offensive," Veydran commanded, his voice a low growl. "We don't wait for them to make the first move. We show them what happens when you wake the wrong species from the dead." The resurgence and its fleet locked into formation, their weapons primed and ready for a fight they had no choice but to take. Veydran's fingers hovered over the activation sequence as his thoughts raced. His every instinct told him to trust Aetheris, but the uneasy feeling in his gut wouldn't let go. He wasn't sure what they were facing, but the clock was ticking. "Cassian, take your squad and lead them in," Veydran ordered, his voice controlled. "We break through their defenses. No hesitation." Drex's voice came through the comms, low and filled with unbridled intensity. "Roger that, Commander. They won't know what hit them." As the resurgence surged forward, Aetheris guiding their movements with deadly accuracy, the battlefield transformed. Human forces, bolstered by the AI's strategic prowess, began systematically dismantling the Xelari defenses. But there was no denying the presence of the ancient ship, looming in the distance. It was only a matter of time before it joined the fray, and when it did, the outcome would be uncertain. "Prepare yourselves," Veydran muttered under his breath. The universe was no longer a place of quiet, of safety. It was a battlefield, and humanity was the last line of defense against something that had never been meant to wake. In the distance, the ancient ship stirred, and the first of its weapons fired, sending a wave of destruction toward humanity's lines. The Xelari forces were on the retreat, but the real battle had only just begun. The ancient ship, still looming large on the battlefield, pulsed with an energy that seemed to distort the very fabric of space. It moved with a deliberate, almost sentient grace, its jagged hull rippling with violent bursts of energy that cut through the chaos of the battlefield. Veydran Holt stood in the command room, watching the unfolding destruction with grim determination. The resurgence shuddered slightly as another wave of fire from the ancient ship collided with the Xelari defenses. But Veydran's mind was already racing, calculating the next move. There was no time to bask in victory, not when the stakes were so high. This was no longer just about defeating the Xelari. This was about surviving the wrath of a force that had slumbered for centuries. "Aetheris, are you seeing this?" Veydran's voice was firm, cutting through the tension that filled the room. He had learned to trust the AI's calculations, but even now, the presence of the unknown ship felt like a ripple in the universe that he couldn't fully understand. "The anomaly is beyond classification," Aetheris replied, its voice calm but tinged with something that almost sounded like curiosity. "Its energy signatures are unlike anything in our records. It is not of Xelari design. It is not of any known design." Veydran's fingers tightened on the console as he watched the new data scroll across the display. "Then we hit them where they don't expect. We overwhelm them with what they can't adapt to." The plan began to crystallize in his mind. This new threat, whatever it was, had the potential to obliterate everything humanity had fought for. The ancient ship had a power beyond the reach of the Xelari, and they would have to use every advantage they had to counter it. "Sayan," Veydran said, his voice deliberate, "I need you to isolate the remaining Xelari fleets. Force them to regroup on the outskirts of the system. We're going to use their retreat against them." Sayan's hands were a blur over the console as he worked. The flickering plasma displays in front of him danced with complex data as he mapped out the movements of the Xelari forces. "Understood. I can reroute their escape routes, but we'll need a perfect window to do it. The ancient ship is too fast, and its firepower, it's devastating." Veydran turned toward the main viewports, his mind's eye calculating the angles. "Cassian," he spoke into the comms, his voice sharp. "You've got to draw their fire. Keep them on us. We need that window." On the other end, Cassian Drex's voice crackled through, a touch of defiance in his tone. "Just like old times, huh, Commander? Don't worry, I've got this." Veydran's lips tightened, but he allowed himself a moment of quiet approval. Cassian was the best pilot they had, reckless but effective. If anyone could bait the ancient ship into showing its vulnerabilities, it was him. The fleet, which had been steadily pressing forward with calculated force, now shifted into a more aggressive posture. The resurgence moved alongside its smaller support ships, weaving through the chaos as their weapons prepared for another volley. The Xelari ships, still reeling from the initial assault, attempted to regroup, but their lines were splintered and their morale shattered. Veydran's mind raced as he plotted their next move. "We have one chance at this," Veydran muttered, his eyes scanning the plasma display. "We'll hit the ancient ship with everything we've got. We use their own firepower against them, force them into a blind spot, where we can land the killing blow. The strategy was risky. The unknown ship's power was unmatched, and the chances of even scratching it seemed slim. But that was the nature of war. There were no guarantees, only calculated risks. Veydran wasn't in the business of survival. He was in the business of victory, no matter the odds. "We've got incoming," Sayan's voice cut through the command room, snapping everyone's attention back to the present. "The ancient ship is focusing fire on our lead ship. We need to act now." Veydran stood taller, his hand steady as it hovered over the command sequence. "Cassian, now!" Cassian's voice was full of controlled chaos. "You got it, Commander. I'm dancing with the devil, but it'll be worth it." The fleet launched into action. Drex's fighter, along with a handful of smaller interceptors, broke off from the formation, drawing the attention of the ancient ship. The Resurgence and the rest of humanity's fleet moved into position, prepared to capitalize on the distraction. Drex's fighter zipped through space at breakneck speed, weaving in and out of the ancient ship's line of fire. The powerful beams from the ship's weapons passed dangerously close, but Drex's skill kept him just out of their deadly range. He taunted the ship with reckless abandon, forcing it to focus on him, to follow his every move as he pulled the fleet's attention away from the rest of the human forces. "That's it, Drex," Veydran murmured under his breath, watching the laser plasma display. "Keep it locked on you. Just a little longer." The battle became a dance of precision, with Drex pulling the enemy ship closer into the trap Veydran had set. The Xelari fleet, still reeling from the earlier assault, tried to regroup. They were confused, disoriented, and unable to react as the trap closed around them. Veydran knew that this was their only window. "Cyan," Veydran said, his voice low but firm, "activate the trap. Let's make sure they don't get out of this alive." The ship's cannons roared to life as the fleet unleashed a full barrage of railguns, missiles, and plasma beams directly into the heart of the ancient ship's weak point, an area identified by Aetheris's tactical analysis. The barrage hit with the force of 1,000 storms, shaking the fabric of space itself. For a moment there was nothing but light, blinding, searing light. Then came the silence. Veydran held his breath, eyes locked on the screen. The laser plasma display flickered, showing a massive tear in the hull of the ancient ship. It wasn't enough to destroy it, but it was enough to disable it, leaving it vulnerable. The ship began to falter, its movement slowing as power systems flickered and dimmed. "Now, Cassian!" Veydran shouted, his voice filled with urgency. "Finish it!" Drex's voice crackled through the comms, filled with fire. "With pleasure, Commander." The sound of his engines echoed in the background as he raced toward the damaged ship, the final strike coming from his fighter. The ancient ship's defenses, already compromised, couldn't stop the barrage from Drex's fighter. In a flash, the ship exploded, a massive eruption of energy that tore through the vacuum of space. It was a spectacle of destruction, brilliant, devastating, final. For a long moment, silence hung in the air. The Xelari fleet, now leaderless and broken, began to scatter, their resolve shattered by the sheer power of humanity's final blow. Veydran's breath came out slowly, a sigh of relief mixed with the bitter realization that the war was far from over. The battle had been won, but there were more challenges to face, more enemies to overcome. "Overlord Zevrak Malthir," Veydran spoke softly, his eyes hardening. "You're next." The galaxy had changed, and humanity, once thought extinct, had proven that even the greatest empires could fall to its fury. The Resurgence drifted in the aftermath of battle, its hull scarred, yet alive with a pulsing energy that mirrored the soul of humanity itself. Veydran Holt stood at the command console, his eyes fixed on the remnants of the Xelari fleet scattered across the battlefield. The dark emptiness of space stretched out before them, a silent witness to the death of an empire. The final confrontation had ended, but the galaxy, so long ruled by the Xelari, was still in turmoil. Veydran's breath was steady, though a sense of finality lingered in the air like a storm passing through. "Aetheris," he said, his voice a mixture of command and something deeper, something raw. "Analyze the enemy fleet. Are there any pockets of resistance?" The voice of Aetheris crackled through the ship's systems, calm and devoid of emotion. No significant resistance remains, Commander. The Xelari fleet is shattered. Their leadership has been neutralized. Veydran allowed himself a moment of relief, though it was fleeting. He knew that the destruction of an empire was never as simple as a single battle. The Xelari might have been defeated, but the galaxy was still full of forces they had yet to understand. Forces that might not see humanity as anything more than a passing threat. He turned toward Cyan, who was still at his station, his fingers working frantically on the console. Cyan, what's the status of the remaining Xelari worlds? Any sign of a counteroffensive? Cyan paused for a moment, eyes darting across the laser plasma displays as the data flooded in. Their colonies are in disarray, but there's something else, Commander. A communication from the Dominion's High Command. They're offering terms. Veydran raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a thin smile. Terms? They're asking for negotiations. Surrender, Cyan clarified, his voice tinged with disbelief. It's almost like they've accepted their defeat. They want to meet. Veydran's smile deepened, but there was no joy in it. They think they can buy their way out of this? No, Cyan responded, his voice sharp now, more certain. They think they can still control the outcome. They think they can control us. Veydran's expression hardened, his gaze sweeping over the room. He wasn't going to let the Xelari worm their way out of their mistake. Humanity had fought for far too long. They had clawed their way back from the brink of extinction, and now they were the ones who would decide how the galaxy would be shaped. Not the Xelari, not any other empire, just them. Send the message, Veydran ordered, his voice a low growl. Tell them that humanity doesn't negotiate. We don't settle. We take what is ours. Cyan nodded quickly, tapping a few commands into the console. The transmission flickered for a moment before the screen showed the cold, distant face of Overlord Xelari Dominion. His posture was rigid, but his eyes betrayed something that wasn't there before. Fear. The loss was too great. The reality of humanity's return too profound. Commander Holt, Xelari began, his voice steady but lacking the venom it once carried. I've come to offer terms. The Dominion will accept your victory. We will honor your demands, as long as you allow us to remain. Enough! Veydran's voice was sharp, cutting through the Overlord's words like a blade. I don't want terms, Xelari. You and your empire had your chance. You erased us, buried us like a forgotten relic of history. But humanity doesn't just survive, Overlord. We rise. Xelari flinched, the image on the screen flickering for a second. There was something fragile in the way he held himself now. The arrogance, the air of superiority that had once defined him, was gone. In its place was something raw, a creature that had realized too late that its time was over. You think this is over, human? Xelari sneered, his voice shaking with the last remnants of his empire's pride. You think you can destroy everything we built? You are nothing but a fleeting mistake. Veydran's eyes flashed with a cold, burning fury. I've seen your mistake, Xelari, and now I'll make sure the rest of the galaxy sees it too. You tried to erase us, but you only made us stronger. You never understood what we were capable of, and now the galaxy will belong to us. There was a long silence, the kind that felt like the world was holding its breath. Veydran's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of truth. The Xelari Dominion had underestimated humanity in ways they could never comprehend. They thought they had wiped them out, but humanity had never been a species to bow down. No, humanity had always been the underdog, the ones who thrived in adversity, who tore down the walls of fate. You think you've won? Xelari's voice was a rasp now, the last vestiges of his confidence crumbling. You have no idea what you've awakened. There are forces beyond your comprehension, beyond your control. You will pay for this mistake. Veydran leaned forward, his voice quiet but unmistakably final. Number you will pay, and then we will rebuild. We'll take the stars you've hoarded for yourselves and remake this galaxy. We'll turn it into something worth fighting for. Xelari's image flickered again, his face now pale, defeated. The Overlord knew that humanity had already won. Not because they had taken a planet, not because they had destroyed an empire, but because they had done what the Xelari never thought possible. They had returned. "I will not kneel before you," Zevrak said, but his words were weak, lacking any of the power they once held. "I will not let you take everything." "Your empire is finished," Veydran replied, his voice a low rumble of finality. "The galaxy doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to humanity." The transmission cut off, the screen going dark. For a long moment, Veydran remained standing, his gaze unwavering. His heart was steady now, his purpose clear. The war was over, but this wasn't just the end of a battle. This was the beginning of something much bigger. He turned to Cyan, his expression hard. "Send a message to the rest of the galaxy. Let them know humanity is back, and we will never bow." Cyan met his gaze and nodded, a fire igniting in his eyes. "It's done, Commander." Veydran exhaled slowly, his thought sharp, his resolve unwavering. The Xelari Dominion was gone, but their fall was not the final victory. It was only the first step in a greater journey, a journey that would reshape the galaxy, not with the blood of enemies, but with the unyielding force of a people who had never given up. The stars outside the viewport glittered coldly, but in the silence of space, Veydran could almost hear the heartbeat of humanity growing louder, echoing across the vast emptiness. This was their time. The galaxy was no longer the Xelari's to control. It was humanity's claim. And as the resurgence surged forward into the unknown, Veydran knew one thing for sure. Humanity was not just alive. It was the force that would reignite the stars.